Thank you all and welcome to our webinar hosted by Compose Labs. We're going to talk about finding alpha with AI. We have been doing some great work with some private equity companies, and today we're going to talk about the details of how to find opportunities with AI to leverage positive outcomes in the PE industry. So I will not be doing much of the talking. My two esteemed colleagues, Eric Carr and Andrew Larson, will be doing most of the talking. Eric, if you want to go to the next slide. They will be introducing themselves as they go. I'm Jeff Rogers. I'm the Chief Delivery Officer and Data Lead at Compose Labs. And we have two of our other partners, the President, Eric Carr, and the Chief Technology Officer, Andrew, that will be giving this talk. Before we get started, just wanted to give a brief overview. Most of you probably know who Compose Labs is, but we do custom software development in the application development, data engineering, and artificial intelligence space. So this talk is going to focus mostly on our AI capabilities, but the cool and interesting thing about AI right now is it does span a lot of the traditional application development and data engineering principles and concepts, and we're able to really put together unified teams and opportunities across these capabilities to create comprehensive solutions. So, but without further ado, we will get into the agenda. Eric is going to walk us through the generative AI opportunity. So what's at stake, give a little bit of context for this discussion. And then he's going to talk about the focus areas that we're seeing drive positive outcomes in our PE portfolio. And then Andrew is going to talk about what I'll call the getting started. How do you go and apply that to transformation and digital maturity, and get started with making sure that you're going down the right path. During this webinar, we're going to be asking for some audience participation. So we're going to launch a couple quizzes along the way, or polls rather. All you need to do is just select one of the answers to the poll, and it really helps us not only gather feedback, but also tailor the content to what the audience is really interested in. So the first poll here is, how far along is your firm in applying AI across the investment lifecycle? We'd really appreciate your response. And as you're filling those out, I will kick it over to you, Eric, to take it away. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jeff. So again, as Jeff mentioned, Eric Carr, president of Compose, and really been focused on working with our generative AI practice. We've been working with a number of clients across multiple industries, and especially as part of this conversation, we really want to kind of hone in on the private equity space. We've been working with a number of firms, both to how are they adopting AI technologies as part of the way that they're doing their business, and secondarily, the portfolio companies, the impact or the potential there. So what I really like starting out with is really somewhat of a historical context. So obviously, as technologists, as business individuals, we're really looking at kind of patterns and really understanding how some of these technology waves has really driven change within industries. And I think we have some really good precedent with the internet, with mobile, to really look back at. And I really like this diagram for a number of reasons. Number one, it really kind of shows where we're at from a journey standpoint. Obviously, AI on the right-hand side has been really explosive over the last 2 to 3 years. We've seen a huge uptick in interest. We've seen a lot of really compelling capabilities on a daily, weekly, monthly basis being released, and we're really on a pretty high growth curve. And I think, as with anyone that's been trying to follow this space, it's moving a lot faster than the internet and mobile. The second element is really, I think, probably getting a little bit more relevant for this conversation is how each one of these waves kind of evolved. So I think we're following in many ways with AI, very similar to the internet wave. So we really, that initial .com consumer internet really drove the initial interest. However, over time, as the technologies got better, as companies began to experiment with how to leverage the internet, we began to see a lot more enterprise solutions. So like the whole SaaS space, new systems, new way of doing business kind of really evolved, and that new processes and workflows is really something that I think drove the long tail of the value that we're continuing to see in a lot of industries with the internet. So obviously there were some internet first businesses that were created, but also, the internet had a significant impact across a number of businesses. And then similarly, I think what we're seeing in the AI space, ChatGPT, release in, 2.5 years ago, it really drove that initial excitement and interest in kind of AI, new AI technologies. AI obviously has been around for quite some time, this new large language model, generative AI space. And we're beginning to see, or we've been seeing over the last 2 years, really much more of a high adoption from an enterprise standpoint. And, really beginning out, it's kind of experimenting with some of these chat bots, understanding what they can do to kind of help accelerate some of the day-to-day operations of, or day-to-day activities of people. But we're beginning to see more and more interest in like, how does AI kind of fundamentally change the way that you operate your business? And this specific slide is one that I really appreciate, because it somewhat kind of talks to kind of the progression that we're seeing both as we work with clients as well as how people are thinking about AI. So this is an example from a call center standpoint. Really the first steps that we're seeing a lot of clients take is like kind of just picking like low-hanging fruit around how do I leverage AI to get more specific information. Maybe they're summarizing existing unstructured data, potentially drafting email responses. But we're beginning to, or we initially see like, say, a 5 or 10% improvement in specific tasks that people are doing. And it's a great way of beginning to experiment with AI to get an understanding of what it's capable of, as well as kind of getting, that exposure and understanding how do you start thinking about plugging in your data, some of the other kind of core components that Andrew will be kind of going through more in his part of the talk. That second wave is really where we're in the process working with a lot of our clients. So how do you, once you get kind of that enabled phase, how do you begin to try to optimize? And that's in this chart you're seeing 20 to 40% improvements from say in this specific case resolution times. But a lot of clients that have began their AI journey over the last year and a half are kind of in this phase. So you're really beginning to get beyond kind of that initial experimentation, beginning to see kind of some meaningful improvements, but really looking at how do you get to 20, 40% improvements. And then kind of, echoing the prior slide, this third wave, how do you reinvent some of the business process flows? We're beginning to see more and more clients really look at that. So how do I go, reduce more significantly by actually re-engineering the way that I do specific functions in my business? And that's really where I think, that's the motivation why a lot of people are looking at the broader valuation of AI and how it can impact businesses. So this is really kind of a journey. And, as part of this talk, hopefully we'll give some sense around, like, really starting on the left. I think we've had some clients that have tried to kind of jump to, these really large changes, and it's very challenging for many businesses. And I think this progression is very important to kind of keep in mind. And we're beginning to see more and more clients in that third wave of adoption, and really beginning to accelerate kind of the value and the improvements they're seeing from AI. So kind of putting that in context within businesses, where are the main opportunities? Now, some of this is, the left-hand slide is a, kind of something from McKinsey. They did kind of an analysis of where the potential economic value was across different functions. Now, this is somewhat predicated on how large the spend are in some of these areas. So sales and marketing, engineering, those are probably the higher spend areas for many businesses, or at least the businesses under consideration. So obviously they're going to show up higher from an economic value standpoint. But I think it's very reflective of the types of problems and domains that we're seeing. So I think sales and marketing is something that we've been working with our clients and seen a lot of interest in, like, how do you go automate? How do you go enable and improve the way that those parts of the organization function? Obviously, software engineering, we won't talk as much about that during this talk, but that is obviously something that's impacting our business. We're really trying to figure out how do we leverage AI to accelerate the way that we're able to deliver value to our clients, as well as many of our clients are adopting some of these AI technologies as part of their development phases. And then the lower right is really kind of these other areas. So we will talk about customer service, customer success, as well as customer care is a critical area that I think a lot of people are seeing pretty quick value for adopting AI in very specific use cases. And, I think this is very reflective of what we're also seeing in the industry. And, as we are working with our clients, really trying to understand where some of their key pain points are and where AI can help kind of accelerate or enable, assist what's going on today. So with that context, I think, from an alpha standpoint, so, we're really, as we're working with our clients and doing assessments, we're thinking about, I don't know if like growth hacking or alpha hacking. And I think what we're really trying to think about, obviously, a lot of it comes back to valuation. So, this is a chart that really shows some of the exit valuations across different industries. Did it by both like kind of EBITDA multiples as well as revenue multiples. I think EBITDA can get a little bit funky if, there's some, cost optimization, from a valuation standpoint. However, you kind of get some sense of like kind of the low, medium, high performing companies. So, and I think what we're really looking at doing is with AI is how do we get more of our, our clients, their client companies in that, third, fourth quartile, like the higher performing ones. And we're talking, many cases, 50, 100%, 25, 50% increase to kind of get from median to the third quartile, fourth quartile. But even, if you start thinking about the top decile, those are really what you're ideally trying to achieve. And AI is really helping enable how do you actually get on the right-hand side of some of those valuation multiples versus the mid-market point. Kind of another view that we like keeping in mind is really around, like what is the fundamental business? So I really have liked Air Street Capital had a recent article in Fortune. Really, there's a lot of companies or a lot of investment firms that are looking at kind of these AI roll-ups. Venture capital firms are kind of buying companies and trying to transform their businesses. But it's, I think, really important to keep in mind that fundamentally there's certain businesses that are out there and there's certain multiples that are going to be maintained. So, the business process outsourcing space is always going to have a lower multiple relative to a lot of your SaaS companies, just given the scalability and the types of business they're in. However, there's kind of this middle category, which I think is what we have found pretty interesting. There's kind of this 2x multiple for digital customer experience or tech-enabled organizations that are really able to kind of leverage technology and be able to get kind of a pretty clear multiple, premium based upon the market in terms of what they're doing. So really, I think that middle area is really what I think we're trying to tease out. Obviously, many businesses are not going to operate like a SaaS company, but there is pretty significant opportunity to try to really move the needle by leveraging technology, and it's somewhat reflective in kind of some of the valuation metrics that we see out there. So with that in mind, I think what we've, really many of the conversations that we've started with some of these private equity firms is really around, a lot of the CEOs are looking at how do I leverage AI? AI obviously is something that they are concerned about. They are trying to figure out how to begin that journey. What are the internal capabilities they need to have? What is the partnerships we have? And, it's somewhat very much reflective that there's been a pretty significant spike over the last year or two in terms of interest as well as prioritization of having and understanding what your AI strategy is. So, hopefully as part of this talk, we'll kind of go through some of that, but I think a lot of what we're doing is spending time with some of these senior leadership teams, really trying to understand their business, as well as kind of understanding how AI can be a positive force multiplier or an accelerator to some of the key initiatives that they're doing there. And, many cases, I think what we're finding is you starting with kind of productivity. So as I mentioned on that slide around customer care, there's kind of like three different kind of stages, really beginning to start with how do you go find those low-hanging fruit scenarios where you can get like a 5 or 10% optimization of a specific function, and then how do you go kind of scale and accelerate it from there. So this kind of notion of enhance to optimize to reinvent is really a sequence that we are really thinking about. How do we help these clients? How do we help our clients kind of think around what are the data implications? What are the infrastructure? How do you leverage these different AI models that are coming out to really kind of drive those results over time? So hopefully that kind of gives some appreciation around where, I think what we're really looking at, AI is just kind of a new tool that we have in our toolkit, and how do we apply it to various business functions to kind of drive additional value, as well as kind of, employee value, customer value. It's all interconnected. So with that,
Yeah,
wanted to
awesome.
start with.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That's a great introduction and overview. I'll launch the second question here, so would appreciate your feedback. What are the biggest hurdles keeping you from moving faster with AI? And while you're answering that, I will also mention, please feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A feature to post questions, and we'd love to get your feedback and answer questions that you have along the way. So really appreciate that. And Eric, I think you're going to keep it rolling now, right?
Yeah. So kind of the middle section. So, I mean, hopefully now there's at least how we're thinking about it. How do we leverage AI to help, improve the valuations as well as kind of affect positive change? This middle section really wanted to kind of cover two different areas. So the first subsection really kind of talks around some of the ways that we're seeing private equity firms use AI within their business. And the second subsection would really be talking about like some of the key areas that as we're engaging with some of these portfolio companies, what are the types of things that we're working on? So kind of jumping into the PE space, I think we've begun with really kind of somewhat of a life cycle. So these are not necessarily fully complete, but like kind of the key functions that are happening within these firms. So there's kind of like the flow on the top. It's like deal sourcing. How do you find deals, deal execution? Once there's an opportunity identified, how do you do due diligence? How do you, there's a lot of mechanical elements, and then as there's a portfolio of companies, there's an ongoing process for the limited partners for reporting out the performance. So there's, I think, a number of areas where AI is kind of accelerating that. And, specifically, we've worked with a number of firms, probably more on the front end part of that. So like really on the deal sourcing side. There's a lot of really interesting capabilities that AI is giving to be able to do more rapid research as well as identification, scoring of potential targets that I think AI is very, very well suited for, given its ability to kind of look at unstructured data, do web search, leverage kind of even proprietary data sets that we've worked with some of our clients on that front. And then on the bottom side, I think there's on the bottom left is really, investor relations experience. So there is some process of the ongoing kind of maintenance of the business. But then there's also kind of some deal, like CRM data elements that I think are very, very critical that we're seeing. How do you leverage AI to really kind of accelerate that or make it more efficient? So, from a fundraising pipeline standpoint, from an enterprise data, really AI is very, very predicated on the data that's available to it. And once it has that, there's a lot of really powerful things you can do with that. So all to say is I think we're really thinking about an ecosystem within many of these private equity firms, the business, and really AI can really have applicability across each one of these specific areas across kind of the typical both kind of company life cycle as well as within a portfolio, all the elements that need to be dealt with it. I won't spend too much time in this next slide, but it's from PE Stack. I really am a big fan of the kind of these industry maps or kind of these architecture type of diagrams. It's somewhat kind of mapping back that there's not only a lot of effort in kind of building some of this tooling internally, and that's probably where we've been most focused on, but there's been a pretty significant explosion in companies that are basically building out capabilities specifically for the private equity space within many of these different areas. So again, I won't go into too much detail around any specific companies, but just wanted to mainly kind of flag this as a potential resource, as well as I think a really nice example around how interconnected a lot of these systems need to be. Now, obviously, from a data integration standpoint, from an analytics, it's very important to try to kind of really understand how these systems fit together, as well as the specific capabilities, since it is very much kind of a landscape, versus kind of a one-stop shop type of process. So, And I think one of the questions that we get quite a bit is, what is actually going on in industry? So this is, not necessarily representative of the entire space, but they're just kind of three examples of how some, large private equity firms have kind of adopted AI approaches to their business. And it's, obviously, each one of them is relatively large, so it's not necessarily indicative of their entire portfolio. But I think these are kind of interesting ways of thinking about how AI is people are beginning to add AI as part of their investment thesis around identifying companies as well as how do they actually manage them ongoing. So this Equity Partners has been probably one of the more aggressive ones around trying to target kind of agentic native businesses. So they've really tried to identify some patterns, some archetypes that they're leveraging to both identify companies, identify opportunities for rolling up, as well as kind of accelerating them leveraging AI. And that is something that they're not necessarily like early results yet, but that is something that they're very much focused on and really trying to push that angle. Thoma Bravo is kind of doing something similar, but a little bit different, which I think we have found pretty interesting, is that they're really trying to build data moats. So they're obviously with AI, data potentially can become more valuable than like kind of the software base of a lot of these companies. And they're really looking for opportunities to kind of like acquire kind of unique data assets. So really kind of somewhat betting on the continued value of having these kind of foundational data sets from many of these businesses. And how do you leverage AI? How do you leverage kind of more machine learning, advanced analytics for that? And really, I think somewhat of a very data first strategy is something that they're focused on. And it's very much predicated on where the AI space is going and the importance of data as part of that. And then Bain Capital is a kind of another example where they are really focused on kind of building ecosystems. So they are probably doing things that are probably very similar to kind of what we're working with some of the RPE partners, and beginning to identify opportunities and like some of these technology patterns with AI that can kind of help accelerate portions of the business. So how do you go build out these ecosystems of capabilities to really kind of help accelerate the sales and marketing function, the customer care function, operations, other areas of the business? So hopefully this is somewhat helpful. I think these are not necessarily like mutually exclusive, but kind of three examples of different firms that are taking AI, the kind of the huge explosion in interest as well as the capabilities, and kind of approaching the problem in a little bit different ways in terms of how they're kind of baking that into their investment thesis. So. And then really, this is just a little bit more of a flash, but these are some of the specific areas that we're working with as we engage with some of our clients to really try and understand what's happening today as well, how AI can help assist some of these functions within the private equity firms. And happy to people are interested, happy to kind of have further conversations in more depth on this slide. So the next subsection kind of wanted to go through before handing it on to Andrew is really around some of the portfolio companies. So what we're seeing to kind of like within the portfolio, so beyond kind of the adoption of EAI from a private equity firm standpoint. And I think a lot of that is somewhat predicated on various industries. Some industries are a little bit more conservative than others. It has been interesting for us. A lot of these, in some ways, laggard industries. Legal generally has not necessarily been very aggressive in adopting technology. Manufacturing is another, industry that we've worked quite a bit with. They've actually been very strongly supportive of looking at AI, and it's definitely one of the top areas they're on. But all to say is, I think what we always want to at least keep in mind is really the broader landscape. And some industries are generally going to be adopting technology more quickly than others, and that is something definitely that's important, since not only is there a technology and data element of a lot of the adoption of AI, but there's obviously a pretty large change management component. So how do you go affect kind of the automation, the changes within the underlying business to be able to actually generate the value from that? And I think what we're seeing, especially in this agentic workforce, probably over the last 6 months of 2025, agentic AI agents, that's definitely been like kind of the key buzzword. And I really like this chart or diagram from Wing Venture Capital. And it really kind of tries to map like some of the agentic workflows force to specific kind of departmental roles. So I think we kind of highlighted sales, marketing, customer experience. So that top left bucket is really an area where we're seeing the most interest from our clients. And it's somewhat representative of that earlier slide from a McKinsey, where the most value is. So these are really key areas where like we're seeing a lot of opportunities for acceleration of value creation, and or like kind of cost mitigation, cost management for some of these functions. And then on the bottom, engineering, data analytics is another area that we're seeing quite a bit of interest, but we won't be covering that as much as part of this talk. So, but honestly, I think we like this view of around how do you kind of really either assist or enable some of these functions. In some cases, we're looking at how do you start with 10 or 20% improvements? How do you get to that 40, 50%? In some cases, we're actually working with clients specifically in the sales space. How do we go reduce the load by 80 to 90%? How do we automate that? And that gives their capability of their team to get 5 to 10x more outreach to more clients, or obviously there's other ways that could be managed. So I think we really appreciate this like kind of agentic workflows, and then how do you really kind of map more from a skeuomorphic role standpoint what AI is doing, and really that's focusing AI on what are the fundamental business problems, what are the fundamental kind of business automations that you're looking at doing within your business. So with that in mind, this is kind of somewhat representative of like kind of another kind of view of the adoption journey. So I think a lot of our clients are looking at like these employee co-pilots, these kind of enterprise-wide AI solutions like Copilot. Gemini's been done a really great job kind of integrating AI within their workspace products. There's other ones that are out there. And then there's also these chatbots. So like ChatGPT obviously has the largest mind share. Anthropic Claude has been doing a pretty effective job in kind of providing capabilities and tools for the enterprise space. Gemini, this is not necessarily an all-inclusive list, but really that first phase, a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of clients begin to start with many of these tools. And, in some cases you get to kind of limitations. So there's obviously a lot of value from like, individual productivity, getting meeting minutes, being able to kind of review and write emails, that type of thing. But really, I think what we're beginning to see is kind of this functional alignment. So like kind of the bottom part of this diagram, how do you actually start verticalizing AI? So the marketing, the sales, customer care, beyond kind of these horizontal AI solutions, that's really where we're beginning to see a lot more potential value from the adoption of AI versus kind of these horizontal solutions. So I do think a lot of these, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes are really, really great ways of getting going. But at some point, there's kind of you hit a limitation, and you're going to need for really kind of value creation and kind of transformation to kind of get more into the bottom part of this diagram. And it's somewhat reflective of what we're seeing. So this is kind of a survey that was done around so they pre-built AI solutions is kind of a good proxy for kind of the top of that prior slide that really talks about like the Copilots, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes of the world. We're beginning to see less interest in kind of adopting those, and we're beginning to see either some customization. So obviously many of those are adding additional data capabilities, because like feeding these AI models with additional data is really critical, but also like you really want to customize it for the way that you do business. So on the right hand side is really where we're seeing more interest, and really how do you go kind of custom build some of these verticalized solutions, leveraging a lot of the core technology. So not building everything from scratch, but leveraging a lot of these frameworks, leveraging a lot of these platforms that are out there to really help accelerate your AI journey. So this is really, I think, a key dynamic. So I think we're beginning to see, or we're continuing to see a lot of shift away from these, or not necessarily away from these horizontal solutions, but how do I do more beyond kind of what some of those horizontal AI solutions are providing? So kind of like two of the areas that we're seeing a lot of interest is, number one, as I mentioned, sales and marketing, the other is customer care. I think as we're thinking about kind of building as part of our kind of discovery and assessment process, really trying to understand kind of what the customer life cycle looks like. Obviously there's a lot of implications from a digital experience. What are the touch points that you have with the business, and it's across sales, marketing, and care. But I think what we find really critical is really trying to identify what are those key operational metrics that you're looking at kind of driving. And then, the right-hand side is really across that journey, how do I go generate more revenue? How do I drive more kind of cost efficiencies? Obviously, like improving my customer experience is a really critical element. And then also ongoing, as many of our clients are trying to build up kind of an AI capability, really understanding the accuracy of AI, what percentage of my processes that I'm automating, and then also at the end of the day is like need to be able to map it back to kind of an ROI, a cost time savings. So I think what we do, especially with a lot of our early clients, is really trying to understand some of those key workflows, where are some of the pain points, where are the gotchas, where AI can potentially have an impact, and then very critically, what are the things that you want to measure to be able to kind of show, if I add AI into some of the capabilities that I have today, what is it actually going to impact from my business standpoint? So these next two slides, I think similar to the PE one, won't really go into those in detail, but these are some specific examples. So as we work with clients to kind of go through from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of the funnel, awareness, discovery, consideration, evaluation, conversion and purchase, also to ongoing post-purchase and advocacy, loyalty. These are some of the types of conversations that we're having with our clients to really both understand what happens today, as well as kind of what AI can actually affect for positive change going forward. So, and then just kind of the last one that I wanted to kind of talk about was really around customer success and care. So I think very similar to sales and marketing, we're seeing a lot of interest in kind of adopting agentic AI approaches to the customer service, the customer success stacks. Some of that could be driven by more advanced kind of customer segmentation, sentiment analysis. There's a lot of knowledge that exists in very much typically in an unstructured way within many businesses, and how do you actually go drive that? And I think very similar to sales and marketing, the bottom part of this diagram is really focused on what are those key metrics that we're looking at kind of driving from an improvement standpoint. So again, still a lot of these initiatives are focused on growth. So how do I, drive net revenue retention? How do I reduce churn? How do I go drive expansion of my share of wallet within many of these clients? There's obviously a lot of efficiency and cost metrics. So if you look at like a call center, average handle time, first time for call resolution, deflection, cost of the resolution. There's really kind of those very specific metrics that you're looking at trying to optimize and improve leveraging AI. And then experience obviously is an important thing. So how do you go leverage AI and continue to provide ideally a similar or even better customer experience? So I think a lot of that comes back to if you're able to answer the phone more quickly, if you're able to kind of resolve some of those issues more rapidly on that first call, that is a huge plus from an experience standpoint. And I think it's just kind of very, very simple, like kind of low-hanging fruit that we've had conversations with a number of our clients around is just like answering the call. Many of our clients, a lot of these call centers are just get maxed, or there's kind of load balancing, and we've had conversations with clients that have had 20, 30, 40% of their calls are not answered within 2 to 3 rings, and that's obviously a critical element of both kind of supporting your customers as well as giving them an opportunity to kind of grow that account. So. And I think very similarly to the sales and marketing side, there's kind of a methodology or a set of areas that we really drill into, and people are interested in. I'm happy to share this after this talk and kind of go into more detail on those specific areas. So just kind of wrapping up this middle section, I think as we look at kind of adopting AI, we kind of look at from a people standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a technology standpoint, and there's a lot of lessons learned across that. So we're finding a lot of people are very interested in adopting AI. They're just not really sure where to begin. And also the reality is, for many of the workflows that we're building, human in the loop is kind of one of those terms that's kind of been thrown out quite a bit, but really we're not necessarily looking at replacing individuals, but really looking at like, how do we go provide a force multiplier with AI for what people are doing. From a business standpoint, I think Andrew will be getting into more around like, how do you actually go build a plan? But, I think a lot of people are looking at like, how do you start small, get some wins, and then kind of really scale out from there. And then, from a technology standpoint, the bottom bucket, It is, the models continue to improve, but I think it's becoming a lot more critical around how they are used, not which models. So, I know we've, probably a year and a half ago, I think a lot of people were doing a lot more benchmarking across the different models. Right now, the capabilities have gotten pretty amazing. And what we're working with our clients is really focusing on what are the types of business problems? How do we leverage the right context? How do we get the right data in to these models to be able to kind of actually do kind of more optimized process automation for them? So with that, just want to hand it over to Andrew to kind of go through the third and last part of this webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. And as we're transitioning to Andrew, we're going to ask our third audience question here. So where do you see the biggest near-term payoff for AI in your portfolio? And we've chosen some of our favorites. I think, Eric, you pretty much covered all of these ones, but if there's big ideas that you have that you're enthused about that aren't on this list, we'd love to hear about that as well in the chat. So appreciate your feedback and participation there. Yeah, and then Andrew, feel free to take it away.
Great. Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about, as Eric was kind of alluding to, Eric, laid the ground floor, kind of talked about, where AI is being leveraged, how it's being leveraged, et cetera. I'm going to talk about how we work with our customers to kind of start that journey, both from a vision and building an ROI and a road mapping plan, but also from an implementation readiness perspective of what do we need to do in order to get ready to be able to take advantage of a lot of the generative AI use cases that Eric was talking about. If you want to go to the next. Yep. So we have an AI transformation and digital maturity assessment. So, why do we go about doing this? I think it can be difficult to start down the journey. Everybody's interested or is talking about generative AI, but not everyone knows where to start. And we really think about it, like I said, in terms of, where do we want to get to? And then how do we actually get there? And what do we need to prepare in order to take that journey? And really what we want to do is drive alignment on where to invest so that we can maximize the impact of the money that we are spending, for these investments. If you want to go to the next slide. So kind of taking a step back, so some of the research that we've pulled from various sources, I'm not going to read each of these, but I can tell you that, the summary here is that most organizations struggle with data. They don't know where it is. They don't know how to integrate with it. It's fragmented. When they make key decisions, they are generally not data-driven. They are very often driven by our gut or our feel of what we should be doing, as well as there's still a lot of heavy manual workflows as part of the core business and business processes. And when we're talking about an AI transformation or our AI journey, having that data foundation plus those kind of codified, process workflows are really the ways that we're going to be able to take advantage of the capabilities of generative AI, and not just from a chat perspective, but from that more agentic AI workflow that Eric was talking about previously. So if we want to go to the next slide. So as far as the assessment, there's kind of 4 key areas. For this talk, we'll kind of more focus on the first 3, but the fourth one I'll briefly mention as well. But we look at it from like a user experience and design perspective. So that's things like the customer journey, the channels within your organization, customer feedback, your various, customer touch points, you can think about it as. And then it's the growth and effectiveness of your organization. So that's sales enablement, marketing, positioning, acquisition and retention, kind of our bottom line metrics. And then as well as from an efficiency and automation perspective. So automating those maybe manual workflow processes, optimizing ones that already exist, introducing generative AI into those workflows, as well as getting kind of that data and analytics core layer that we want and that we need to move forward with our business. And then of course, the technology and infrastructure is kind of it's the baseline, it's the foundation for everything that we're doing. So we also need to have a good understanding of, like, yes, we know where the vision of where we want to go, the places we want to optimize, but we also need to understand and make sure that we have the core pieces in place to be able to build on top of that. And I'll get into that in a little bit as well. So as far as our approach, we kind of have a 4-step process. So the first is a series of discovery sessions and workshops, and really what it is understanding where your business or your businesses are at and where they're looking to go. Really having those interview stakeholders is really important to kind of be establishing what's that value baseline we want to get to and where we want to go from there. And then we take a scoring and assessment process approach. So we want to be very value driven and metrics driven. We don't want to be making those gut feel decisions as part of our processes. And then generally what we'll do is we'll do a gap analysis to make sure we understand, here's where we are and here's where we want to get to. It doesn't mean we need to do that across every part of the organization. There are some we want to emphasize more or others, but we definitely need to have that in place. And then lastly, just road mapping and next steps, and I'll get into more detail on what that actually looks like. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, but this is just as an example of kind of those 4 areas, at the top there, and then the individual, assessment points that we'd be looking at. So depending on, the needs and goals of where we're at within the organization, we may emphasize or de-emphasize some areas more or less. And then Eric, if you just want to jump to the next slide, what we're really focused on is, okay, here's where we're at now. Those are the dark blue, and then the light blue is where do we want to get to? And then what is that path to get forward to get to that point? So one thing I thought would be interesting to talk about is the common areas or problem areas within organizations that inhibit AI adoption. So 3 of the common ones kind of going on the left side, up, down, are kind of legacy systems. So the basis for these agentic workflows, these agentic chat interfaces and whatnot, is really at the end of the day, like I was saying, a data problem. And if we have a lot of these legacy CRMs, legacy ERPs, and we can't get access to those data, that can cause problems. So that's siloed data, that's poor data hygiene, lack of data lineage, et cetera. And that really inhibits, our agentic models or generative AI to be getting to the good outcomes that we want to. So oftentimes we do see a need for modernization of ERPs, maybe integrating with CRMs. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the first step, but it is something that eventually in an AI journey needs to get to. So I briefly touched on it earlier. A lot of manual processes. That's something we often see as kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of the AI adoption, is getting some of those manual processes automated and leveraging generative AI to do that. And then finally, kind of the biggest one, and I think one of the most important ones, is really just a lack of understanding of the customer interactions within the organization. So like not only having a good CRM in place, but also leveraging that data, understanding where it is, and understanding how to integrate and source from that, and really understanding all of those touch points that you have with your customers is really critical. So this is kind of like the journey that we often see, and I think Eric alluded to this a lot. But kind of at the far end of the spectrum, it's kind of what we call AI blind, but it's basically unaware or fearful of AI, and then you slowly become curious, and then as you get into this like daily AI expanding kind of phase, that's what Eric was alluding to with, that's the Copilot adoption, that's the ChatGPT adoption, that's leveraging AI as an augmentation of our individual workforces. And then as you continue up that maturity spectrum, you're starting to be AI first, AI evangelists, AI employee journey. And that's really when you're starting to leverage those agentic AI workflows and use cases to empower your business beyond just, the kind of individual Copilot. And you're really starting to go into the more vertical areas of your business to really see a lot of impact moving forward. So this is the kind of process. So we talked about from a high level maturity process, but when we specifically are talking about from an AI perspective, it's really a 3-step journey, right? It's aligning on the initiatives and your strategic objectives, doing that from the start. That's from your corporate, business, functional, operating, kind of all across the board. And then the first step is really identifying what are areas that are that have high value for leveraging generative AI with relatively low effort, at least to start with. And then finally, it's taking those, building it, measuring the outcomes, and then repeating, right? It's that building and refining and continuing on. So as an example, maybe you're leveraging generative AI initially, maybe more to automate some workflows, reduce manual effort. And then as you're building, you're getting that value, then maybe you start to tackle those ERP problems, maybe those CRM problems, et cetera, so that you can continue to scale and get more and more value for what you're doing. And then from kind of a methodology perspective, the way we think about it is, so I've been talking a lot about those use cases, right? Aligning on value, understanding where you're at, and where you want to get to. And then it really comes down to, okay, from a data and technology problem or problem space, do we have what we need in order to, build upon that foundation? In some cases, the answer is yes, we can continue to build and refine. In some cases, we need to, add new capabilities. Maybe that's CRM, maybe that's unlocking, some of that legacy ERP data, et cetera. And then as you're continuing to grow up that maturity spectrum that I talked about earlier, then you start to think about and implement things like security and privacy, skills and capability, organization and governance. So all those things that kind of go along with that maturity scale. But this is the way we kind of take that in steps. And then, talk a lot about data. So I felt like it would be disservice not to show this. But really, when we think about it in terms of from a holistic data perspective within your organization, the foundation is really that architecture and governance. So that's all of the planning, all the pieces in place to ensure that we have a plan for how our data is going to continue to, how we're going to leverage that data. So we're not just throwing data and assuming people will be able to use it or whatnot. Kind of back in the old data lake days, we used to call that a data swamp. Like if you build it and assume people will come, like it's not going to be a good time for you. So having that plan and that guidance and that governance in place is really important. And then the next layer is the actual engineering part of it. So understanding what are the integrations we need to have. We have these disparate systems. Do we need to centralize that? How are we going to leverage that moving forward? Then that analytics and reporting. So just having that basic understanding of that data and your needs, and then layering on top kind of that AI and generative AI component is really how we do that and how we move forward with our organizations that we work with. Yeah, and so then I guess kind of lastly, so after we've gone through our assessments, we understand where we're going, and we understand where we're going to get to. It really comes down to a more strategic planning. So that's the building of the full roadmaps. It's understanding the value, the ROI that we're looking for. It's laying those measurements, putting those down in place, from the get-go. It's going down the implementation route. So some of the common things that we start with and that we do: AI chatbots, virtual assistants, document intelligence in terms of RAG, so really leveraging that unstructured data that you might have within your organization, process and workflow automation, and then analytics and insights. And so how do we go about that, right? It's rapid prototyping, it's iterative development, it's continuously optimizing and supporting as we grow. So we're not trying to take out these big chunks all at once. We're literally asking ourselves, what can we do to deliver value in the next month, in the next 2 months, in the next 3 months, learning from that process, iterating and growing and developing from there. So yeah, that's in summary, that's our approach.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate those insights. I think we have about 10 minutes left here. Does the audience have any questions? Otherwise, I was gonna put Andrew and Eric on the spot with a couple questions, but we'd really love to hear from you if you're curious to learn more about what we just talked about. All right, while you're all thinking, I'm gonna ask a question to our panelists here. So have we been seeing or how do you approach like standardizing or scaling insights across portfolio companies, given that, can PE firms apply these across their portfolio companies, even though there's different data systems and maturity levels across them?
Yep, I can speak to that from what I've seen. So Generally, what I'm seeing is a standardization in terms of what data are we looking for. Because as you said, the biggest problem to tackle is that the disparate companies are going to have disparate systems, right? They're going to have various different legacy ERP systems. Some are going to be homegrown, some are going to be off the shelf, some are going to be off the shelf but haven't been supported in 10 years, that kind of stuff. So really identifying and understanding on what you're looking for and building that initial layer there. As well as then what you can do is take an iterative approach to each of those portfolio companies, understand the nuances from a data perspective, and then you're building it into that centralized and that streamlined pipeline so that you can start to aggregate and get that insight across the different across your portfolio. I don't know, Eric, if you had any other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've heard is like Excel is the main kind of integration point for a lot of those data, and the reality is, I mean, it's a fine starting point. It just requires a lot of manual work. So I think what we have tried to do is, especially as we're looking at some of these different elements of the business, how do you actually start standardizing on some of these key performance KPIs and metrics? As obviously we want to start with, as we are implementing AI, measuring those improvements. So that's at least one way of trying to standardize what are the types of things that you're tracking to make sure that these programs are successful, or you're actually changing the functions. And then ideally you're getting a little bit beyond Excel. Now, the reality is I don't think Excel is going away anytime soon, just given the variety and of the different data formats out there. But ideally, at least for some of these key metrics, and how do you actually look at the business in consistent ways across a portfolio, that is an area where I think focusing on adopting AI and then trying to measure its impact has been pretty effective at trying to define kind of a more consistent way of viewing those metrics.
Yeah, and I think that leads into kind of the other question that I had, which was, we've talked today a lot about aligning AI initiatives with corporate strategy, and the whole culture of AI is how can you go fast, right? But how can we balance that fast and that iterative approach, knowing that we do need to maintain some centralized governance, especially, both within our portfolio companies, but even across our portfolio as well. So, how are folks striking that balance between, moving quickly, but also adhering to the governance needs?
Yeah, I think like for some of the, I think generally people are starting in like just very specific domains, either from a data standpoint or for parts of the organization. So before kind of moving it across an entire organization, starting small. I typically, the safest is starting with public data sources or ones that are less sensitive. That I think is probably the easiest. So there's just as you're working through some of those governance policies, understanding what AI can and can't do. I think the data processing agreements are pretty critical. So obviously what some of these AI service providers are able to do from a legal and compliant, regulatory standpoint is pretty critical. So the data processing agreements really define, are they able to use any submitted data for training? What's the data retention policies? So just really starting with some kind of more simple, safe sources of data, it typically has been kind of an easier approach, and then over time, kind of building out more maturity from that perspective.
Yeah, to echo that, taking an iterative approach to your governance policies as well.
I think just
Awesome.
general theme is like start small and grow from there. I think a lot of clients, 2.5 years, there was a lot of moonshots with AI. And I think as with a lot of your large, if anyone's gone through a large ERP or CRM, any of these large programs where you try to just kind of do a forklift upgrade, they're very, very challenging. Now, not that it's not possible, but there's just a lot of inefficiencies. And I think what we're finding, especially with AI, is, identifying how do you go get those quick wins, the 5 to 10% improvements, and then really trying to build out kind of the broader programs, the broader governance, the broader understanding around that. Once you have some momentum versus, again, like the moonshot or, whatever however you want to define that, because that's a very, very challenging way. And I think generally we're seeing there is a little, I mean, obviously any hype curve, you're going to get some backlash. So right now, and I think we're getting some people like, hey, like a lot of stats are coming out. People have not gotten value from adopting AI. Well, the reality is a lot of it's been using, and again, nothing necessarily bad about like the co-pilots, but there's just those types of they're somewhat limited in terms of how much of an impact they're going to have across your business, and they're a great starting point, but that shouldn't be reflective or indicative of what AI can potentially do for your overall business.
Great. And we did get a couple, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. We did get a couple questions too from the audience. So there were comments made around 10 to 20% increase of improvements. I believe that was probably to the operational efficiency areas that we presented. Was that in a particular time frame? Like how quickly are we able to see those measurable and market improvements to either our operations or our go-to-market or our customer retention or those metrics that we're capturing?
And it depends. I mean, it depends on the function. I think that's one of the reasons why sales, marketing, and customer care are typically one of the better places to start, because we've seen those types of improvements within like the order of like 2 to 3 months. So especially as you're thinking about an SDR, if you're thinking about an agent, if they're able to basically if we're able to reduce the call time from like 10 minutes to 9 minutes because we're able to get some of that specific information that's available to them more quickly, those are kind of the timeframes that we're seeing. So ideally, we're usually trying to show that level of value within 3 to 6 months. So you're just trying to take off a bite-sized chunk, and then obviously there's larger transformational types of things that can be put in motion in parallel. But really, 2 to 3 months is ideally what we're targeting. The reality is for some of the data and system complexities, 3 to 6 is probably a safe target.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, when you do start small or you start with kind of safe use cases and expand from there, those efficiencies just get multiplied as you're adding more and building that momentum, right? So start 3 to 6, 6 to 9 months if it's a bigger one, but it's going to just be gradually increased and improved as you continue to add more AI capabilities along the way. Another question was, there was one of the use cases for sales marketing was around targeted outreach. There was a specific question if we had run into PitchBook, specifically if there's an out of the box component with PitchBook, or are we seeing what other tools are we recommending as it pertains to like targeted outreach capabilities? I'm thinking of a use case where we're home building a targeted outreach capability that is hyper specialized for one of our customers' actual needs, that has a lot of like data capabilities in that context about their specific business, which is why people are choosing sometimes to move to those custom built solutions as we presented earlier. But Eric or Andrew wanted to get your thoughts too on if we've seen any good options for targeted outreach.
Yeah, it's a pretty happening space. I mean, Clay is another one. So there's probably a dozen, or well, at least a dozen that are out there. I think why, at least, I mean, I mentioned Clay, they're very much more focused. They're very focused on data, because a lot of this is predicated on, if you have the data, a lot of these models are very, very effective in terms of kind of building a more targeted kind of messaging. And I think what we're finding is generally, if your inbox might be reflective of a lot of spam out there, if you don't have the right data about who you're targeting, the messages can just be wonky. So I was talking to someone last night. I keep getting a bunch of spam emails about like kind of solar on our office building, but they need to be talking to our landlord versus myself. But so I think PitchBook's a good one. Like there's a lot of really good ones. I'd be viewing those as like, how do I go get more context, more data about the ICP or whatever the group of companies that I'm looking at targeting. And the reality is, I think it's pretty. There obviously are some things that we're doing that I think we're on the leading edge in terms of like, how do you go pull that information together and create a more targeted message? But it's always going to come back to the data and the context that you have for those users.
All right. Well, we've used the whole hour. Really appreciate Eric, your insights, and Andrew, your insights, and appreciate the audience participation as well. So thank you all for attending our webinar. Hope you all have a wonderful day.
Yep. Thanks everyone for taking the time.
All right, bye-bye.